Morning, Governor. Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you all for being here as we release the 11th Biennial Report of the Domestic Abuse Homicide Review Panel. My name is Lisa Marchese. I'm Deputy Attorney General, Chief of the Criminal Division, and I also serve as Chair of the Homicide Review Panel. Every 2 years, the panel releases a report of its finding from the previous 2 years of case reviews. The panel, for many of you who don't know, is a multidisciplinary group of professionals who analyze retrospectively closed homicide and near-death cases. The panel is the only entity in the state of Maine reviewing these cases with an eye towards making systemic changes to prevent domestic abuse homicide. At this time, it is my honor to introduce the 11th report of the Maine Domestic Homicide Review Panel on the path of prevention. I want to welcome and thank Governor Paul LePage, Attorney General Janet Mills, Public Safety Commissioner John Morris, and members of the Homicide Review Panel who are standing behind me, and most particularly Susan Fuller, Panel Coordinator, for their willingness to work together to prevent domestic violence homicides. Because of the high level of support Maine's panel has received from all levels of government, as well as the commitment of its members, we are considered a national leader in fatality review. In fact, in 2015, members of the panel were invited to present at the National Domestic Violence Fatality Review Conference regarding our review process. Thank you all for your commitment to preventing domestic abuse homicide. At this time, I would like to introduce Governor Paul LePage. Paul LePage became Maine's governor in 2011 and won re-election in 2014. He has attracted national attention for his ongoing efforts to reduce taxes, reform welfare, and bring sound fiscal responsibility to state government. And as many of you know, as governor and throughout his life, he has been an outspoken advocate for reducing domestic violence in Maine. Welcome, Governor LePage.
Good morning, and I want to thank you for inviting me today, and I had some prepared remarks, but yesterday I met with parents of a murdered victim. And I know that we've tried to do a lot. The Attorney General's been doing a lot of work on domestic violence. Certainly the legislature is moving forward, the judiciary is moving forward. But I tell you, what we have to do this year is very simple. Whenever someone is accused of domestic violence, in a condition of bail has to be an ankle bracelet. It's that simple. We have to monitor them. Because it always, too often, ends up in a homicide. Half of the homicides in this state usually involve domestic violence. Now, you can say you're violating their rights. Maybe so. But I believe taking the safe approach, because dead people have no rights. They lost them. When you kill them, it's final. So I think we ought to take a little bit of precaution, and I'm going to urge the legislature this January, and I'm going to be putting up a bill that says if you have a PSA against you and you're caught violating it, you wear a monitor. You're monitored. If you get arrested and you get bail, it's got to be a condition of bail to be monitored until such time as you have your day in court. I just think we need to move forward. One death, one homicide through domestic violence is one too many. And we certainly, it's really hard to sit in an office with the mom and dad of someone who got murdered. Now this year I've had 3 such meetings, and we got to work at eliminating these meetings. There's an inappropriate way dealing with this when you just pass the buck on to the next person. I think it's time the legislature addresses the issue. Domestic violence is not good for our society. It's a heinous crime. And the worst thing that people don't even want to address is the survivors, the children who survive or who see their parent, one of their parents being murdered. It's really horrific. So I'm going to urge the legislature this year to domestic violence. If you're bailed out for domestic violence, you wear a monitor. If you violate a PSA, you wear a monitor. End of story. And you go to court and we'll take whatever the judiciary has to hand out at the trial. But we have to make our job has to keep victims alive so they can get through the process of the judiciary. And we can do a much better job at it. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor LePage. At this time, I'd like to introduce Janet Mills, Attorney General for the state of Maine and member of the Homicide Review Panel. Attorney General Mills was an Assistant Attorney General from 1976 to 1980, prosecuting homicides and other major crimes. She was the first woman in the criminal division of the Attorney General's office. In 1980, she was elected District Attorney for Androscoggin, Franklin, and Oxford counties, a position to which she was elected 3 times. She was the first woman DA in New England and one of the first in the country. A.G. Mills has herself prosecuted hundreds of domestic abuse cases. A.G. Mills has lent her support and her unique perspective to the panel's work this year and has initiated a public awareness campaign to provide information about safety planning for those experiencing or witnessing domestic violence. Attorney General Mills.
Thank you. Thank you. And I too have met with families of homicide victims, parents of murdered children, parents of murdered victims, and they are excruciating meetings. I look forward to working with the administration on tackling this difficult issue. And I am so pleased that the Maine State Police, the Commissioner of Public Safety have worked with us to coordinate the new Unsolved Homicide Unit. We are working assiduously to prioritize and review those cases. We just got an indictment in one case recently, and we're looking forward to trying that case that is 36 years old, 36 years in the making. It's hard to say that I'm pleased to present this report, because pleasure is not what's in it. There are horrific stories, horrific statistics, some of which we passed out, horrific histories. In recent years, 9 children have died in acts of domestic violence. Kids as young as 10 weeks old. Kids as old as 17. They had names. Their names are Corbin, Jason, Noah, Lily, Sean, Duane, Destiny, Larry, Leo. Their lives are gone. Other children survived. They were impacted for life. One 4-year-old in the cases we reviewed in the panel watched his father kill his mother. 2 other children were in the home when their father killed their mother. 7 other children were impacted for life when their mother was murdered. One child's mother was incarcerated for a long period of time. One child's father committed suicide. In many cases, extended family members were thrust into the position of raising young survivors of domestic violence, homicide, and our report is dedicated to those caregivers. Aunts, uncles, grandparents, neighbors, older siblings are raising these children out of a wilderness of violence, out of a forest of fear, the darkness of death and loss. It takes an extra effort by all of us. In this report, we talk about adverse childhood experiences, those things that affect the ability of children to have healthy, productive lives later on. Some of the children grow up to take refuge in drugs, and we're seeing this in the figures on opiate overdoses and opiate abuse. Some of them have trouble in school. Others have picked themselves up by their bootstraps and reached pinnacles of success in our state. All have needed our help. Let us not forget them. There are also silver linings in this report. There are kudos to emergency workers, advocates, law enforcement professionals, physicians, and mental health workers who are preventing domestic violence every day. There are many suggestions for improvements, including taking seriously certain warning signs, the 3 S's: stalking, strangulation, suicidality. When an individual says, "I don't feel like living anymore, I feel like giving up hope," take that seriously. Because lack of respect for your own life often leads to homicide and other acts of violence towards other people's lives. And there are suggestions in here for law enforcement, for employers, for workplace policies, for healthcare professionals, how to ask about domestic violence, how to get that out of a patient, and for others. And we welcome your attention to this document. We thank the dozens of people who participated in this over many months, including Susan Fuller, our coordinator, and the doctors and the law enforcement, Commissioner Morris, and other professionals and advocates who helped digest these cases and help us get through the tangled web of abuse and the history of violence in these cases and find positive suggestions for change that can help prevent another loss. If only one item in this report saves just one life, our work will be worthwhile. Thank you for coming, and I invite your attention to this report. I've also made copies of 2 pages of the report, an excerpt on pages 50, 51, and 52 that tell everybody what to do if you suspect somebody's being abused, a neighbor, a friend, a family member. And I invite your attention to this document as well, an excerpt from this biennial report. So I thank you for coming. I invite anybody else here to make any comments. Lisa, go ahead. Lisa's going to take over. Thank you, Lisa. I'll leave that there.
At this time, I'd like to turn the floor over to Francine Stark. She's the director of the Maine Coalition to End Domestic Violence.
Thank you, Lisa, and thanks to the Governor and the Attorney General for their passionate words. One of the things about domestic abuse and violence is that it is a nonpartisan issue in every way, because this is an issue that affects all of us across every line. No matter what kind of person we are, no matter what walk of life, domestic abuse and violence happens all across our state. It's been my privilege to be part of this work for several decades. And one of the things that I am grateful for every day is that I work in a state where people work together so thoughtfully, so deliberatively, so carefully in order to do our very best to address the issue of safety for victims of domestic abuse and violence and accountability for those who perpetrate it. I think that every year we find something more creative, something more effective to make inroads into this problem. I know that advocates are working every day, talking sometimes in the course of a single day. We help hundreds of survivors in the state of Maine. All the 8 domestic violence resource centers in Maine served over 13,000 people last year. 13,000 people reached to us for help last year. That means that we had at least 13,000 people who were committing acts of domestic violence against their families, to the extent that those people felt so afraid that they needed to reach out for help from us. I think that's a very sobering statistic, along with the fact that too many also came to the end of their lives in this context. And so I encourage everyone to reach out, as both the Governor and the Attorney General have encouraged us. When you recognize that someone may be the perpetrator of abuse, reach out and talk to them. If you feel that someone might be the victim of abuse and violence, talk to them. And remember that through the Maine Coalition to End Domestic Violence, help is available 24 hours a day, 365 days of the year. We appreciate your support in that effort, and together in Maine, we continue to coordinate our community response to this issue, and I am grateful for the many efforts by the many people who really believe that we can create a world in which domestic violence is a historical piece of data rather than a current piece of data over which we struggle and weep. Thank you.
That will conclude the press conference unless anybody has any questions directed to any of the folks here.
Lisa, I have a question. I guess maybe from your point of view as well as if there's anybody else who wants to comment. 11 years, your panel has been working on this. The governor's been speaking about it for every year of his tenure, Attorney General as well. Have we made any progress in actually reducing this? Can we actually make progress in reducing it?
I think we have. As somebody who spent 15 years as the elected district attorney for 3 counties, I did see progress in the number of reports, which means people crying out for help and getting help. We've seen progress in the legislature. We've enacted laws relating to domestic violence. We enacted stalking laws. Just this last session, there's a mandatory sentence for repeat offender stalking incidents, things of that sort of helping. We've improved the bail laws. Judges are taking bail very seriously. Bail commissioners are taking bail very seriously. No contact provisions are routine. The protection from abuse orders are much stricter than they used to be. And just this week in the United States Supreme Court, the Supreme Court upheld the premise that federal law, a predicate offense for federal firearms prohibition purposes, includes Maine's assault statute that encompasses intentional, knowingly, or recklessly causing offensive contact to another person. So those federal laws are kicking in now, constitutionally, legally. A lot is happening. We've had a lot of people working on a lot of aspects of the problem. Are the numbers of homicides? Well, there's a slight decrease over 10 years, yes. But there's also an increase in people getting help and in people being saved. I can't give you statistics. I just know that because I've seen it.
Attorney General. What do you think of the governor's proposal that we just laid out? With ankle bracelets?
We had actually a task force looking at the ankle bracelet issue. There are some technical issues that we hope to overcome with that. Funding mechanisms and reliability mechanisms. Not all the ankle bracelet items that are out there on the market are effective. We saw one case where a federal defendant escaped his ankle bracelet a few years ago. We want to make sure that doesn't happen because we don't want to build a false sense of security. But it's a useful tool, and I'm looking forward to working on that.
So that's not either a yes or no
Pardon?
at this point? That's neither a yes or no at this point, or something you're working on?
We've been hoping to do that for some time, and funding is an obstacle. Yes.
Jane, can I just address one piece of the report that it talked about this provision in the ACA where there's supposed to be screenings. Healthcare providers are supposed to offer screenings, yet none of the people that perpetrated domestic homicide last year were screened.
You mean the victim?
Either
screen.
or.
Okay.
Yeah.
We make recommendations along those lines, and you'll find them on page 50-ish, I think. It's from the Physicians for Social Responsibility. And thank you. Screening questions developed by Physicians for Social Responsibility. I know that these questions are being asked. I mean, I've been asked them. Do you feel safe at home? I go, there's nobody else but me there, but that's all right. Yeah, my stairs are safe and my life is safe. But they are asking these questions. But we found some more tactful ways of inviting a response from a timid patient, including in the mental health context, not just physical healthcare providers. So we're looking forward to helping the medical community and the mental health community to ferret out abuse wherever it might occur, ferret out those kinds of threats that people aren't necessarily spontaneously going to tell you about. There were some cases that we reviewed where we thought that could have happened, might have happened, should have happened. Similarly, we observed that in the workplace, some of the victims were gainfully employed and had friends at work, and we were hoping that there might have been an opportunity where a coworker could have inquired or offered some help. And we make suggestions along those lines. So we're not faulting any particular segment of society, just offering recommendations for improvements. Does that answer your question, Steve?
Well, yeah, I guess, in how many cases were these people that either were victims or perpetrators, had they actually seen a healthcare provider that maybe could have received that screening?
How many? I'm not sure we documented exact numbers, sort of anecdotal. And again, the 16 cases we reviewed were selected. They're not all the cases that occurred during that period of time either. So it wouldn't be accurate to say 5 cases, 4 cases, or 10 cases. Thank you.
And how, of laws that have been put in and efforts, have you been able to do some things to identify in advance likely perpetrators to help people deal with those problems before they become domestic violence perpetrators?
Right, and Francine will tell you, the advocates are not there simply for the victims, but they're there to provide services and referrals to batterers intervention programs.
And I guess as you come up, Francine, I would say, are people voluntarily taking advantage of those, not just sent there by the courts?
Batterers intervention programs, in fact, last year we did a report for the legislature out of the Commission on Domestic Abuse and Sexual Violence, and found that unfortunately only 68% of the cases of domestic violence convictions, the referrals were not being made as part of sentencing to batterers intervention programs, but in fact were being made to other kinds of programs which are not appropriate for batterers. So one of the things that this report highlights is the places where every sector of the community can do better. There's things that can be done better. There are a couple of issues that are just getting started in Maine that are very promising. We implemented the ODARA risk assessment as a requirement for all law enforcement as of January of 2015. So we're in early days, but need to pay attention to how it is that the ODARA is being implemented and how that perhaps is helping us make sure we know who the perpetrators are that are the greatest risk of continuing to do what they do and doing it worse. That will help us inform how we use the resources we do have for things like monitoring, for example, and release. So I think that there are a lot of things that have been done in the criminal sector to really try hard to really focus on perpetrators. One of the things I appreciate about the work of the panel, though, is that, we know in our work in advocacy that fewer than half of the people we work with actually want to engage the criminal justice system. They may well, however, engage the civil justice system. They may get a protection from abuse order. They may need to go through a family matter process around parental rights and that kind of thing. Not all of the horrible things that are done in the context of domestic violence are against the law, and probably won't be. But what we know is that we all have an opportunity to intervene all the time. And so our work is really comprehensive work. It's not only about, but very much about, helping people use the criminal system, but it's really about looking at a comprehensive safety planning process. And that's really how people manage to figure out a way to leave and leave safely, which survivors are doing in Maine every single day.
Does that answer your question, Ron?
I guess so. I don't know if there are ways to reach out to people, obviously, most of the time it's men, who may have a propensity.
Right. We talked about suicidality, suicidal ideation, and if you dial 211 and ask for a suicide helpline, you will get some help. You will get a referral to an emergency referral for counseling and help. So that's something that helps along those lines. The person may not call and say, I'm ready to kill my spouse. It's unlikely they'll say that. But we're finding in 60% of the cases when a person's talking about suicide, they're desperate enough to end their own life. They're also desperate enough to end somebody else's life. So suicide prevention is part of this effort in preventing domestic violence. Yes, Steve.
One last question.
You speaking for yourself, or?
Well, yeah, for me.
No.
Okay. In the report, it mentioned that the weapon of choice, for lack of a better term, in perpetrating this are firearms. Do you have confidence that firearms dealers are doing their part to screen for these folks? I don't even really know what the protocol is for them in the screen.
No, I mean, there's a chart on page 12 that indicates the weapons used in the cases that we reviewed. Again, just the cases we reviewed, 56% of them involved firearms. 9 cases involved firearms. You'll recall there was one case about 2 years ago in Cumberland County where it was reported in the newspaper that a particular firearms dealer declined to sell a firearm to an individual. That person then went back to the same store the next day and was allowed to buy a firearm and committed homicide with that gun. We also, on page 17, applaud firearms retailers for deciding not to sell to customers they believe to be risks. We recognize retailers for supporting employees who decide not to sell firearms to individuals about whom they have concerns, because there's a serious moral, if not legal, liability, responsibility for doing that. Anything else?
I'd like to add about the batterer question. One of the things that we know through research is that batterers will change their behavior when they feel that the cost of continuing to do what they do is going to be a higher price than they are willing to pay. And the cost that they most don't want to pay is to be lessened in the eyes of their peers. The impact of people's family, coworkers, and friends can't be overstated. That what we really need to pay attention to the way that the folks around us are talking about their partners, talking about their behavior, talking about their level of rage and distress, in order to be able to say, you sound really upset, what is it that you're going to do with that? Because I'd really hate to see anything awful happen. I think that's a place where we've done very little, and we have a lot more to do, which is to really address how is it we are as community, are we paying attention and intervening? Because by the time it gets to a place where someone's made a decision that they're going to take someone else's life, the opportunities to intervene are much less than when that person is younger and developing their ideas and their attitudes, and that's where we have the greatest opportunity to intervene. Once people are cemented in their attitudes, it's uncommon for them to volunteer to change their own beliefs, but they might be convinced to change their beliefs by the people that they really care about and respect.
And once again, the fact that we're here talking about this means it's no longer a dirty little secret behind closed doors, that domestic abuse occurs every day in the state of Maine. And there is help out there, and we want people to come out and talk about this, whether they feel they're potentially a perpetrator or a victim or a child who's witnessed it. The courts are much more cognizant of the effect of domestic violence on families in every respect, and we want the public to be aware of that too and help out. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. Tonight, when you run your story or you print your newspaper, the more attention we bring to domestic violence and the more information you bring to victims, we believe that it will help in their safety. And I know many of you, when you run a domestic violence story, you run the domestic violence resource hotline, and we appreciate that, and we appreciate you all coming out today because information is very powerful for victims. Thank you.